Hey guys, welcome back. This video is a little bit different. This time, it's not about one of my rear motor Frankenstein builds. It's about my mid motor Frankenstein build. And before I begin, I'd like to start by saying, when it comes to rear grip, I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. So, this car is a B6.3D. And when I built it, I had been running already a B6.2D highly modified and my rear motor B5.6. So my B6.2D started off last year pretty much box stock with a layback gearbox. Now I was told by the powers that be that a layback gearbox will not work around here. And, you know, one of our best two-wheel drive buggy drivers, he does race a B6.1 or 2 with a layback. But, I mean, he's a freak. He can drive anything. And he does really, really good with it. Me, not so much. I need to get that forward bite. And to do that, I upgraded to a 4-gear stand-up. And that wasn't enough. Then I went to brass C&D blocks. And I went to, actually, B5 arms on a B6.2D, turned around opposite so that they sweep forward to give even more forward bite. So all the brass in the ass, plus 4-gear stand-up, plus B5 arms, swept forward. Car ran great. Matter of fact, a good friend of mine that I race with over almost every weekend, he built the same car, and he like, if he didn't dominate on his home track, he came pretty close. But I'll be honest, I think he dominated two-wheel drive buggy on his home track with that setup. And shout out to Ray Monday for helping us get those things going. This car, though, I was like, I'm just going to take it and try it as is and see what all the upgrades to the B6.3 will do on our tracks. So I set it up with a layback gearbox. I kept the gull front tower. I kept the gull front arms. I kept the layback and the B6.2 arms and that wide pivot point in the back. And it really only ran well on one track, and that was the track that was the highest grip that we have. And I could run it as is. And did well with it and raced it there. And I podiumed with it anyway against some pretty good guys in its almost box stock configuration. Eventually, though, it started to lack a little bit. So the first thing I did was I changed the front. So let's have a look at that. So even though this is a B6.3D, this is a B6.1 front end. What do I mean? It has a B6.1 flat front tower and B6.1 flat front arms. Now I really like how flat arms make the car steer on our tracks. Shocks in the center on the arm, shocks in the center on the tower, plus 3 caster head bushing at the top to bring the axle down to get as much steering as I can. Still running the front wing from the 0.2, but other than that, this B6.3D has a 0.1 front end. When we open it up, we can see that the servo and all that servo mounting stuff is 0.3. There's obviously not going to change any of that because that is a real good improvement. You look at my electronics, they're pushed. Here's the ESC and receiver plate, and yet here's the ESC and receiver as far back as possible against the battery. The battery, where's the battery? Against the waterfall. Wait, no it's not. There is no waterfall. Take that out. All that does is stiffen up the chassis, which prevents flex. And what does that do? Takes away grip. So I removed that. A little extreme. I hadn't done that on the 0.2. I may put the waterfall back. We'll see. So next, 4-gear stand-up. Note the motor. It's on the other side. There's the motor. Yeah, so the motor's on the other side because this is an OG B6 4-gear stand-up. Discontinued. So I started to panic buy and scooped up 3 or 4 of them. 3 or 4 of them? Yeah, and then sold one complete one. Not all that long ago, but the rest I'm keeping for, you know, because the parts are gone, they're gone, they're not making them anymore. So I got a couple squirreled away for a rainy day. So if we keep going to the back, then, well, next, underneath that gearbox, or attached to that gearbox, are the B5 arms. The B5 arms that I'm running on the opposite sides So I've got a B5 with B6.2 arms on it, and a B6.3 with B5 arms on it. Frankenstein. But again, it's all about forward grip. What these arms do is they sweep forward, so they actually bring the wheels more in line with the motor, helping with the rear weight bias. As it sits, it probably has 64 or 65% weight bias. And then I had strapped a bunch of lead tire weights to it the other day, and I got it up as high as 67. I got to get out and test. I just hit the track once this way, and I didn't even bother to turn on my decoder. So springtime comes, I'll get back out and I'll test it with and without the weight. Talking to Ray Monday, he said that he found that the brass D block actually made them handle worse, not better. So I did do some testing earlier this spring on my B6.2, and I tested with the brass D block and without the brass D block, and found that it actually handled better with the aluminum D block. So right now my B6.3 is set up with brass. The D block, however, is not a 0.3 D block. One of the issues that the guys that were helping me with pointed out was that wide C and D block that the 0.3 car runs. It's there to take away grip, which is the opposite of what we want on dirt. When this car first came out, and the guys who know that I'm an Associated fanboy asked me, they're like, "You gonna buy the 0.3?" I'm like, "No, I'm not gonna buy the 0.3 dirt car. It's not what we need for our tracks here, so I don't think I'm gonna bother." But you know, I can't help myself, and I bought one anyway. And whatever, it worked about as well as I expected it would. And so I started to slowly convert it into the same rear end as my B6.2D. And the biggest difference was the C and D blocks. I found out that the C and D blocks fit. I should have always known that they would fit. They didn't change any of the mounting hole locations whatsoever. They just simply made the C and D blocks wider on the outside, if you will. So I put the C and D blocks back on here from a 0.2, put the 4-gear stand-up on here from a 0.2, put the B5 arms on here, basically now returning to that what worked for me B6.2D rear end. So pretty different from most B6.3s you're going to find out there, because what makes a 0.3 a 0.3? Wider C and D block. What did I do? Took them off. Went back to a brass Exotech C and a brass Exotech D. As a matter of fact, this aluminum gearbox brace, and this goes all the way back to the B6, I'm thinking about getting that milled out of brass, and then maybe even the ball stud mount milled out of brass to really add extra weight to the back of the car without having to put additional weight on the back of the car. I'll just simply make the original components or the existing components heavier instead of strapping a bunch of weight on the back. Like some of the guys here that are successfully running low-Z stand-up gearbox mid-motor cars have these brass weights screwed to the back of the car, off the back. I was told when it comes to a mid-motor car, you want to add weight in front of the dog bones, not behind the dog bones. You want to keep the weight in and around the motor, not behind the dog bones. But whatever, it's working for them. So a lot of testing in my future for this car, and while I'm trying to get it figured out, I can always fall back on my B5.6 because it just works. It just works without any fuss. Why am I even bothering? I still like the idea of running a modern mid-motor car if I can get it to perform as well and generate as much forward grip as a rear motor car. So now the layback gearbox, yeah, it works, but it's limited. On a good day with good grip around here, it's great. But on a bad day with bad grip, you just can't. It's not there. This car often provides more forward traction than I need. So again, I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. So what do? Well, I can throw the B6 arms on there, the B6.2 arms on there rather. I can move my hubs. Right now my hubs are all the way forward. I can move them all the way back. They're all the way down. I can bring them up, right? I can dial out mechanical grip with this setup. I can only dial in so much mechanical grip with the layback, and then I'm done. I got nowhere else to go. So this is going to provide, in some instances, more forward grip than I need. But I'd rather have more than I need and the ability to dial it out than be limited in how much I can dial in. So that's the rationale behind this build. So just, you know, if you are in a location where the tracks are loamy, low bite, natural, untreated surfaces, and you're having a hard time to get your mid-motor car to hook up, these are some of the things you can do. 4-gear, not going to find it, but the B6.1 3-gear stand-up is still available. I don't know why Associated discontinued the aluminum motor plate, but they released, I should say, a carbon fiber motor plate. So here is a B6.1 3-gear stand-up with a carbon fiber motor plate. I tested this car for a day or two with this gearbox, and there's no difference in weight bias between a 3-gear and a 4-gear. The difference being the rotation of the engine adding more on power or more forward traction. The 3-gear, the way the rotation works, it's adds on power steering, or so I've read. That being dyslexic, I might have that backwards. You'll have to figure that one out for yourself. The one good thing I like about this gearbox over the 4-gear, 2 things. One, the ball stud mount is in the same location as the layback and lay down, so figuring out roll centers aren't that big of a deal. When you go to the B6 gearbox with the B6 ball stud mount, it's a few millimeters higher. So you need to actually bring, if you were running, you know, 2.5 millimeters of ball stud washers on a 3-gear stand-up or a layback gearbox, you don't need to run that much, because you've already, by nature, switching to this gearbox, raised your inner ball stud. So keep that in mind. You have to bring the ball stud back down to get the same kind of geometry you were getting with a layback or a 3-gear. So that's one advantage. The other advantage of the 3-gear stand-up is quick access to the diff. 4 screws, 5, because you got to get the water, you got to get it off of the waterfall. So either you unhook the waterfall from the chassis, or you just take this screw out, and that allows you to remove the top of the gearbox and get quick access to the diff without removing the gearbox from the car. With a 4-gear stand-up gearbox, the entire gearbox needs to come off of the car so you can access the diff. Pain in the butt, but it's a small price to pay for the added traction that you get. Also, something that I learned the hard way, and I still have a video up with this error in it. I was complaining about how the shock towers don't fit on this gearbox. Well, that's because there's a difference between the B6 shock tower and the B6.1 and the B6.2 shock towers. The holes don't line up perfect, and they can be used on this gearbox, but it's not ideal, and you can strip out the mounting screw locations in the plastic gearbox. So take note, if you're going to run a 4-gear stand-up, get your hands on a B6 rear shock tower. This is a J Concepts B6 rear shock tower in the tall option, because I run my shocks in 31 millimeter, again, to get a bit more rear weight bias, a bit more oil, a bit more material, just adds a bit more weight bias. So I run the longer shocks on the back of the tower. So, well, I hope that was educational. And if you have any questions, if I can answer them, I'll do my best. So feel free to drop a question or a comment in the comment section below. And until next time, everybody, take care.